From unexplained noises to alleged possessions, the Smurl's claims have sparked both amazement and skepticism. But is their story a genuine account of supernatural terror or a clever fabrication designed to deceive? In this video, I'll examine the evidence, expert opinions, and inconsistencies to separate fact from fiction and uncover the truth behind the Smurl family haunting. Is it a chilling true story, a hoax, or something in between? And as such, they are linked to the Warrens, so this video is also part of my series on the Warrens, where I've been doing deep dives of them and their cases, and slowly uncovering the truth behind their legacy. So what I normally do in my shows is I first do a brief retelling of the story of the haunting. Then I go in and break it down and analyze what is the fact and what is fiction in the story. And then once you have all that information, you can decide what you think is true or not true in this case. This one is interesting. It'll be a bit different from some of the other videos you've seen because there's not a whole lot of footage I can show you. There is some, and we will look over it. But the interesting thing about this case is it's kind of hard to find really a whole lot of anything. Even try to find like old news articles and things, which it's a little strange because all the other cases that we've worked on, I've been able to find quite a lot of stuff. And I'm just going to put on a tinfoil hat for a second here, but there is a new Conjuring movie coming out, and I'm wondering if some stuff was buried because it was hard to find really any news articles, old news articles, and normally I can find the old ones. I even use like the Wayback Machine and everything. I think the only way I'd be able to dig up these articles is if I actually went to that state and went into the library to pull up the newspapers. So this is interesting, but I still have a lot of information, and this is probably still going to be a really long video, so bear with me on it. But the Smurl family haunting is one of the many notorious paranormal cases in American history, with allegations of demonic possession and supernatural events terrorizing the family for years. But how much of it is true, and is it just a cleverly crafted lie? As the case went on, the Smurls faced a skeptical public and investigators who questioned their credibility. The family was struggling to find anyone who would take their claims seriously, and they were often met with ridicule and disbelief. Now let's first start with their story. Jack, who once served in the Navy as a neuropsychiatric technician, was now working as a production manager for Topps Chewing Gum Company. He met Janet in 1967 and they got married a year later. Jack and Janet soon had 2 children, Dawn and Heather, and future twins would be on the way, but we'll get to that. They were a typical American family living in a small mining town in Pennsylvania. Jack's parents, John and Mary Smurl, lived nearby, and the family was very close with one another. Life was good. They had a modest home and they were happy, but that was until 1972 happened, when Hurricane Agnes hit and flooded most of the area that they were living in. The government forced everyone to relocate permanently as it was unsafe to come home. They lost everything in the hurricane. They stayed with Jack's parents for a bit of time, but the home was really cramped with the whole family and his parents. So by 1973, Jack's parents decided to look for a duplex to move the whole family into. This brought the Smurls to 328 and 330 Chase Street. The grandparents lived on one side and the family on the other. The duplex needed a lot of work. It was quite the fixer-upper, and the Smurls spent a lot of time remodeling, repairing, and decorating the house. And to save money, they were doing it on their own. Jack's father, John, was a welder, so he had a bit of experience with that, and he apparently could do a little bit of plumbing and electrical as well, so he wasn't like certified in it, but he was like a certified welder. The first 18 months on Chase Street went well, but then strange things began to happen. Initially, the events were small. Tools went missing, then reappeared. Old stains on the walls seeped through 4 coats of fresh paint, and other odd things such as that. But they chalked it up to just odd occurrences, nothing out of the ordinary. At the beginning, the home seemed to be a good move for the family. Jack was promoted at work, the kids were excelling in school, and the in-laws were happy. But as the strange events in the home escalated, so did other problems. Mary, Jack's mother, suffered a heart attack, and everything in the house kept breaking breaking, even though it was brand new or fixed, most commonly the leaking pipes. The Smurls apparently were then struggling to make ends meet, and I'm assuming it's probably the cost of Mary's medical issues, the constant repairs on the house, and they did eventually become pregnant again with twins, so they're probably just running really short on money. I couldn't find exact details on their finances to know for sure, but I'm just making assumptions. The kitchen appliances would catch fire even though they were unplugged. Apparently they were unplugged. Awful odors overwhelmed the house, only to disperse moments later. A television set apparently burst into flames with no apparent cause, and a new carpet arrived with a stain on it that kept reappearing after they cleaned it. As well, there was what looked like smoke stains in one of the walls in the room. It seemed like there was like a stain on the wall, like there was a fire upstairs, and they kept like seeping through the coats of paint, so they just installed wood paneling instead. And when they installed the wood paneling, then apparently claw marks appeared on it, and they installed a new sink and bathtub, which also was severely scratched. I'm just going to pause for a second here. I don't go into the rest of what I have here isn't going to pick apart all of their instances and all of their experiences, but this particular area I'm just going to point out. The carpet story is a little confusing because if it arrived with a stain on it and it just kept reappearing, maybe that was the design of the carpet. That one's a weird story. However, they kept saying that there was claw marks on the bathtub, on the toilets, on the tubs, and on the walls. And there's no pictures of these claw marks, and there's video as well. People have done tours of the house. I didn't see any claw marks, so I don't know, maybe they replaced everything again. There really wasn't a clear answer on that. By 1975, apparitions were being seen in the property. Jack and Janet's oldest daughter, Dawn, started witnessing people floating around her bedroom. She would call out, but when Jack came to help her, they would dissipate and he saw nothing there. Footsteps were continuously heard on the stairs, drawers opened and closed of their own accord, and empty rocking chairs rocked and creaked as if someone was actually sitting in them. After the twins were born in 1977, things in the house escalated. John and Mary Smurl would hear loud and abusive language coming from Jack and Janet's side of the house, even though the couple was not even arguing. Janet would hear voices in the basement as she did laundry, and an apparition appeared to Janet in the kitchen. The room went icy cold and black, and a faceless human form appeared. The apparition walked right through the wall and appeared to Mary Smurl in the other unit. So in going through the story, it does say they're having money problems, but it doesn't say at what point. And I'm assuming it's about this point because they have extra kids and mouths to feed and a lot of stuff keeps breaking. I'm assuming this is the point where they start struggling for money. If you watch my other videos, you'll notice I don't usually pause during story time like this. The timeline is all over the place everywhere on this, so I tried to piece this together as best I could. So I'm kind of like unsure about the order of some of these things. When I do have a date on it or a year on it, I will throw it in here, as you can see. So Janet had heard about Ed and Lorraine Warren, and by January 1986, she contacted them for help. The video that I'm going to put on the screen as well of them doing a bit of a tour of the house, that was made in February of 1986. The Warrens began their investigation by asking the Smurls about their family life, religious beliefs, and other factors. They were trying to kind of see if they were practicing any dark magic. As well, they were accompanied by Rosemary Frew, a registered nurse and psychic, who also did a tour of the house. I tried to look into this psychic a little bit more because I never heard of them bringing in another psychic with them. I thought Lorraine was always their psychic, let alone a nurse as well. So this was kind of interesting to me, but I really could not find any more information about this. But if you know anything more about this Rosemary lady, leave it in the comments below. The psychics ended up identifying the bedroom closet as a crossover point between the two sides of the duplex and detected the presence of 4 evil entities in the building, 3 of them being spirits, and one of them they believed was a demon. Without any evidence supporting family dysfunction, tragedy, or any involvement with the occult, the Warrens looked to another cause for the haunting. They concluded that the demon had probably been dormant for decades and had risen to draw on the energy of the girls entering into puberty and the family's strong religious beliefs. Both are common factors in poltergeist cases. As well, just point out, this family was very devout Catholic. They were very, very religious. The Warrens then set out to expose the demon by provoking it. Ed played religious music, Gregorian chants, and confronted it with prayer. It seemed that this whole thing actually escalated the situation. I'll just give you a warning up here. Again, I'm talking about Essay from a Ghost. If you see my other videos, same thing. Soon, attacks began to ramp up, and Janet and Jack started reporting being essayed by a succubus and an incubus. The Smurls had tried several times to obtain help from the church. Janet thought she was going to receive help from a priest called Father O'Leary, but later discovered that the priest didn't exist and it was the demon pretending to be a priest. The Roman Catholic Diocese of Scranton said that they would consult with experts on the Smurls' case, but thought it was unlikely that they would become involved in an exorcism. With the church unwilling to help the family, Ed Warren brought in his trusty pocket priest, Father McKenna, who technically wasn't an official priest at the time. Like, I think he was kicked out or he left the church because he didn't agree with their sanctions on something. But Father McKenna had already performed more than 50 exorcisms for the Warrens in the past, and he was happy to help the troubled Smurls. Father McKenna performed the ancient rite at Smurl's home, but it did nothing but serve to anger the demon even more. Janet and Mary Smurl began to be slashed and bitten, and Karen Smurl fell seriously ill from a strange fever and nearly died. Father McKenna performed a second exorcism in late spring, but it seemed to have had little effect as the first ritual as he performed. The demon had now begun harassing Jack Smurl at work even, and following the family on camping trips. After repeatedly being refused help from the church and knowing that it would be pointless moving, the Warrens encouraged the Smurls to go public and put pressure on the church. In August 1986, the Smurls went public with their story. They gave an interview to the Wilkes-Barre Sunday Independent newspaper in the hope that somebody reading the article might be able to help them and end their ordeal. The Smurl house became a tourist attraction for the press, skeptics, and curious members of the public. The press attention from such publications as the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Buffalo News, and Scranton Tribune finally pushed the Roman Catholic Diocese to take some action, and they offered to take over the investigation. The Warrens also had planned a mass exorcism with several priests and prayer groups as well who visited the house. Bishop McKenna performed a third exorcism on the house, and this time it seemed to have been successful and there were no more disturbances. However, 3 months later, just before Christmas, Jack Smurl saw a black figure he believed was beckoning him into him to possess him. Jack grabbed his rosary and he prayed, and the figure disappeared. Then soon the banging and the smells and the violent attacks started once again. This is where the timeline gets a little confusing, or the amount of exorcisms, I'm not sure, but I'll tell you what ends up happening in the end. First, let's get through the entire experience of what happened with the press. So the Warrens' investigation sparked a media frenzy, with the news outlets and TV shows clamoring to cover the story. The Smurl family's haunting became one of the most famous paranormal cases in history, with many believing it to be one of the most credible cases of a haunting ever recorded. But among all the attention, many began to question the authenticity of the Smurl family's claims. Some believed that they were fabricating the whole story for attention and fame. Others believed they were trying to capitalize on the haunting phenomena that was gaining popularity during the 1970s and 80s, because this particular story did happen right after Amityville, which was very profitable. So where I want to go and dive more deeper into the Smurls and analyze what was really going on, it really kind of occurs when the press got involved, when it was a big show of everything. So we're going to walk through essentially the Smurls' eventual public downfall. And then I'm going to discuss with you guys, we're going to do a section on the Warrens because I have a lot to say about that too. And we're going to talk about them and how they relate to this case and a little bit of other things I found only on this case that you might find interesting. So the Warrens will be coming up at the end. The beginning of the end. From skeptics to inconsistencies in stories to an unsympathetic public and neighbors spilling secrets, the Smurls wouldn't be able to maintain this circus show much longer. Closer examination of the very little evidence we have to work with reveals inconsistencies and contradictions. Many of the reported events were unverifiable, and some even seemed to be staged for the cameras. The family's own accounts were often vague and lacked concrete proof, causing the public to become more skeptical. As neighbors began getting tired of the daily frustrations of the chaos on their street, they too were happily ready to voice their truths and concerns to anyone who would hear it. This is the part of the Smurl story that has been forgotten by time, and with the Warrens were happy to help people forget. So let's get into it. The Skeptics. Now I'm going to be going over, there's actually a very good article written by the Committee for Scientific Investigations of Claims of the Paranormal, which I believe they renamed to Center for Inquiry. And the person who did the deep dive is Paul Kurtz. Honestly, everything that you need to know about the problems of this case is in this publication. He did a very good job, and he had people on the ground doing the footwork, doing the research, and looking into this. And I will be pretty much referring to a lot of his thing. I did go through and confirm what I could confirm as well. And he already puts quotes anyways to point to specific newspapers and dates. So it's very well done. I suggest you read it. It is going to be linked to my references. Now, the organization name is quite long, and I was listening to another podcast. The way that it's written out, it actually is CSI Cop, and that's what they refer to the organization as throughout the rest of the podcast. I think it's a cute name. I'm going to roll with it as well. Well, there were other investigators and skeptics that did show up to the location as well. Apparently, there are like witches and other spiritual healers and providers. The biggest one that made the most noise and that the Warrens seemed to be the most scared of was this organization, which is CSICOP, so CSI Cop. The person at CSI Cop who was organizing this deep dive investigation was Paul Kurtz. Paul began to contact the family to allow them to do an investigation to prove if the haunting was real. After all, their claim for going public was to get help. But funny enough is when CSI Cop showed up and offered help, and when other spiritualists and investigators showed up, suddenly they wouldn't let them in or talk to them. And that was about the time when the Smurls and the Warrens began being secretive and not allowing the press into their home anymore, nor answering press calls. They said they wouldn't talk to any, quote, unsympathetic members of the press. Pretty much, unless you were backing the church and religion path, they wouldn't talk to you. So they're really pinholing this haunting. Some of the most compelling counter-arguments against the haunting comes from the perspective of the skeptics. They argued that the family fabricated the entire story for attention and financial gain. They point to the fact that the Smurls were struggling financially, and this was the time when the media was very interested in hauntings, and they were like big ratings and big money. Paul Kurtz reports, once the story appeared, the CSI Cop office received many calls from the media and the public asking if we knew what was really going on. With some reluctance, we decided to try to find out. I phoned the Smurl house and told Mrs. Smurl that we wanted to send a team to investigate. She said she would get back to me. When I didn't hear from her, I phoned again and repeated my request. Again, she said she would get back to me. But again, I waited in vain for her call, which never came. Paul and his team enlisted the help of two CSI Cop scientific consultants, Richard Bush, chairman of Paranormal Investigating Committee of Pittsburgh, and Milton Rothman, a professor of physics at Trenton State College. Richard Bush contacted the Smurls, and after some conversations were had, they agreed to let the team come to the home to investigate. When they got there, however, Ed and Jack were standing on the porch and denied them entry. Ed then began trying to argue with them about their credentials, and the Smurls eventually called the police. Pretty much the Warrens took over the case, and they would not allow any other teams in for investigations or any people that they didn't deem worthy enough, and this is the typical play from the Warrens. On an ABC show in Buffalo, Paul Kurtz was debating Janet Smurl in an interview. Janet complained, saying that she called CSI Cop offices and they were advised to have members of her family visit a psychiatrist, and that perhaps the family had been watching too many late-night horror movies. But Paul checked, and CSI Cop has no record of receiving such a call, and their policy is when someone calls in to get them to mail a letter stating all the facts in writing and any additional evidence they may have so they can be added to the queue of investigators. And Paul did check, and there was no letter on file from the Smurls. Paul was able to wrangle in a 25-minute phone call with the grandmother, Mary Smurl. In this call, she told him it began with rappings on the wall. When asked about which wall, it seems it was the one adjacent to the teenage girl's bedroom. Mary also said that the noise followed the family on vacation. She said she heard it coming from a TV against a wall, but she said it could have been coming from the wall itself. Apparently, the teen girls were in that room beside the grandparents as well. And the eldest daughter, Dawn Smurl, she did a lot of interviews with reporters, and her interviews actually caused some skepticism because she got stories mixed up and dates and stuff, so it didn't really help their case. But supposedly, they say they felt that she really liked being in front of the camera, and getting the attention. Now, the weird thing in this case, and I'll go over it, there's a lot of different members of the church who, like different names and different people who were trying to help or called in or talked on the phone to or whatever. So it was really hard. I was having trouble figuring out which father and which priest go to which timeline. So I'm just going to throw in these names. I can't guarantee at what point they were involved in the timeline, but I just wanted to bring up something what one of the fathers said. Father Trabold, he was really cautious with what he said to the press, but he was speculating the event might be due to psychokinesis or a psychiatric condition. And the psychokinesis thing is often used by parapsychologists for like poltergeists. It's highly controversial and no one's really been able to actually like prove the existence of it. The psychiatric explanation, however, seems more relevant to the Smurl case. I couldn't find the exact details of what happened, but apparently the father Jack, he does have he had water on his brain. He had like a surgery, and apparently the surgery can cause short-term memory loss, like what happened to him in the water sitting there, like it wasn't fully repaired and it could cause short-term memory loss. But Jack insists he talked to his doctor and his doctor said that it shouldn't cause hallucinations. But this like brain injury obviously came up a lot with the skeptics. So a psychiatrist, Stephen Barrett, and a psychologist, Robert Gordon, did offer to provide psychiatric examination and diagnosis of the family, and the Smurls declined the offer, saying that the family was not in need of psychiatric treatment. So all skeptics could really do is base a lot of their theories and thoughts on things that they saw externally, press conferences and things of that nature. Since they weren't really able to talk to the family directly or go inside, they could only base it on what they could collect around the town. So the psychologist, Robert Gordon, after looking at everything that was available to be looked at for evidence-wise, he felt that the family might be suffering from hysteria, similar to the Salem witch trials. He explained that the family could be having some kind of shared tension coupled with the family's strong religious beliefs, and it could create a delusional system of belief. Something terrible may be going on in this family that has nothing to do with demons, but it's become like a demonic entity because of their religious fervor. So in Paul's paper, Paul of CSI Cop, he explains that for any of these demon claims to be accepted, they must be corroborated by independent observers, like accepted by the public, not necessarily the church, right? And thus far, in the case of the Smurls, he only has testimonies of the Smurls and or the Warrens, which all include, it's all unsubstantiated claims of the paranormal. There's no photos, there's no audio, there's no video. And to prove something is true, all available evidence must be reviewed and all possible alternative explanations must be pursued. And that's what they would do in this organization. But it was kind of clear that the Warrens didn't want that to happen. The Associated Press also quoted Paul as saying, "The case had all the characteristics of a hoax. It included exaggeration, if not outright fabrication, and that unfortunately it contained considerable uncorroborated mishmash of stories." So Janet Smurl was angry about these remarks, and in response, she said that Paul and the CSI Cop investigators had already made up their mind and they didn't accept the supernatural explanations. So pretty much they weren't going to get in to actually investigate this house. I mean, they were trying. They would still try because in spite of being denied entry, they continued to press the investigation on. They did offer to put the family up in a hotel with everything paid for to allow investigators access to their home for a week, and the family still said no. And that was sort of their last ditch ask to get inside the house. So with that last no, Paul decided to send 2 members of the CSI Cop staff to the town to dig further into the facts. If the investigators weren't going to be allowed into the home or to interview the family, then they would dig up everything they could around the town. And that includes any press interviews, anything off the record things too, neighbors, geography, history, anything at, the city council, building plans, anything. So investigators Barry Carr and Mary Beth Gurman were sent in. They were already given a tip that the area under the Smurl's house was honeycombed with abandoned mine beds, so they went to investigate that first. The investigators visited the Wilkes-Barre office of surface mining, where they reviewed the maps and spoke with the staff there. Here, I will interject. The Smurls said that they called the mining department when the smells first started happening because they thought maybe that was causing it, and they were told that there wasn't anything under their house. However, there's two issues here. So one, I couldn't get a date on when they first told the reporter that, or if it was just something added to the book, because I feel like I couldn't really find any reporters talking about it, and I think they added it to the book after they saw CSI Cop did it. You know what I mean? Like, just to cover their bases. That's what I think happened. But I can't find any reporter thing to like try to... It's hard to prove. So there's two issues here, right? So one, the office did tell the Smurls said that there's nothing under their house. So then the Smurls decided to actually get their house checked, the structural issues and things like that, because maybe it's just something in the ground, maybe the foundation or whatever is cracking, whatever it would be. The Smurls said that they brought someone out to the house to look at the foundation and structural issues, and there was nothing wrong with it. Everything passed perfect. So let's circle back to the investigators at the office. So they're talking to a spokesperson for the mining office, and that spokesperson pretty much denied that an abandoned mine could cause the symptoms of a haunting. But to be honest, bureaucracy, I'm pretty familiar with it. I've worked in it before. I wouldn't be surprised if this was also just to remove their own liability. They would never confirm it either way because they'd be too scared of a lawsuit. And this kind of gets confirmed. The investigators found out a porch down the street and a garage on the next street had to be rebuilt after they caved in. And they ended up finding out that events like this happen sporadically throughout the area quite often, a little bit too often. So this makes me think that yes, the mines are an issue, but the city doesn't want to have to pay for new porches and foundation fixes, so they're just going to deny. But we do catch the Smurls in a lie here, because according to reporter, I might mispronounce this, Tom Oddpike, who had been in the house and in the basement, he said the Smurl house is badly settling. So he pretty much confirmed that the foundation is not good and the basement looks like it's like cracked and not doing well. So if they had a professional come out to the house, the professional wouldn't have signed off on it being like 10 out of 10 perfect, right? Maybe they had a family friend because they were doing their own renovations and repairs, which is a whole other part of this story as well. And maybe they got a friend to check it, but they definitely didn't get a professional to sign off on it. So what did our skeptic investigators do next? Well, Carr and Gurman then started questioning all the neighbors. It was a bit of a mixed bag. Some neighbors think the mine could be causing the noises. Others said that they've had no noise issues from the abandoned mines. However, one skeptical neighbor pointed out to a squirrel on the tree in front of the Smurl's house. He said, "There's your demon." And funny enough, all the other neighbors were agreeing. They reported that many squirrels, raccoons, and skunks inhabit the area and cause a lot of noise and damage as well. When it came to investigating by talking to the neighbors, on the whole, the neighbors really treated the Smurl case as a joke. Except for one neighbor, Debbie Watson. Debbie reported hearing screams in the Smurl's house when no one was home and scratching noises at the screen of an upstairs window. Debbie was apparently next door neighbors with the Smurls. All other neighbors, including the woman in the duplex who was adjacent to the Watsons, to Debbie, reported that nothing strange was going on. The investigators next spoke to Steve Ellis, who lived in the house for 17 years before the Smurls bought it. Steve reported nothing strange had ever occurred in there, and he doubted the Smurls' claims. So a lot of people were kind of, being really talkative with investigators and the press at this point, because they were kind of getting sick of the Smurls. An area resident, Bernard Radsvin, ended up reaching out to the investigators to tell them about the foul smell. He said that the foul smell that the Smurls reported was being caused by an inadequate sewer pipe that the town had kept receiving complaints over. This is a small town, you have to remember. So, for one, the gossip travels. But for two, there's this pipe, and apparently, it, serviced a lot of homes. So, people had been complaining about it quite a bit. Street Commissioner Joseph Reisky denied that there were no complaints. He said no complaints ever came in. But many neighbors, after they looked into this, the investigators at CSI Cop, many neighbors insisted that they had been complaining about it for 2 years at town meetings, and they keep talking about the foul odor that's emanating from the sewer. They also reported a recent fire at a nearby lumberyard also might account for some of the smells. And, when I look at the story of this, in the book they talk about it smelling like sewage, then rotten meat. But in the interview with Lorraine, they just talk about it smelling like mold, which makes sense if your pipes are constantly leaking and the place is a fixer-upper. So I feel like it's just a mixed bag of smells, and they just assigned like a demon smell to it in the end. Because I think at one point they actually said sulfur smell too, but that was only mentioned like once or twice somewhere. But this story does confirm that the city or town was just denying things that were broken all over the town. They were just denying it because they denied about the mines, then they denied about the sewage pipe. I think, to me personally, confirms the bureaucracy part of this. They just don't have the money or want to spend the money to fix things around the town. Plus, on top of it, if they confirm it because of the media attention that was on this case, they could probably open themselves up to a lawsuit from the Smurl family. Another interesting tidbit, neighbors were also quick to point out that if the house was infested by demons, the Smurl children didn't really seem to care, and they weren't bothered by it. They didn't seem upset ever. And often they were left alone in the house by their parents. Like, they would just leave them be. So if they're so worried about their kids getting hurt by demons, why are they leaving them alone? In one of the interviews, they actually talk about they make sure that they don't fall asleep before the kids do, because they want to make sure that the kids are safe. So if they're leaving them at home alone, it just seems like contradictory. I'll see if I can find that clip and throw it in.
You go to bed waiting, listening, to make sure that the children will not be hurt.
Also, apparently Janet did report that she called the police to file a complaint about her house being haunted, and the investigators did look into this, and there was no call for help from the police for the Smurls. Even though the investigators said they checked and there was no call, they continued denying and saying no, they called. So it was just like a brick wall. So in the end, CSI cop pretty much concluded that he believed the haunting was due to an abandoned mine shaft nearby, which could cause strange noises, a broken sewer pipe, which could generate foul smells, and pranks by teenagers, including possibly, he didn't say this, but I think, and someone else pointed it out, the eldest daughter. And all through this, Ed Warren kept claiming to have videotapes, audio tapes, and pictures of the haunting, like a videotape of a dark shape, audio of the noises heard, and other pictures. But when the CSI cop asked for that evidence, there was always an excuse, which we will get back to that evidence as well, because it's always just constantly an excuse. Now, this was a pretty detailed investigation by the Skeptics, but there was also stuff going on with the press and the public as well. While all the Skeptics were doing deep dive investigations, there was other things going on. Public favor was quickly souring, and the press had begun to turn on the Smurls and began questioning their motives. The press and the public. Our first issue is timelines. The press began pointing out that the timelines were starting to not make sense. When they first told their story, they said it had been going on for only 18 months. They had already been living there for like 15 years, I think, at this point, or 13. But soon after the 18-month statement, they then said that it had been happening for 5 years. Then they changed it to 13 years. The stories and accounts of what and when things happened just weren't lining up. And the one daughter I told you about, Dawn, she spoke to the press quite a lot, and her stories cause holes in her parents' stories. I don't have examples of this, just conjectures saying that her stories did this. So I can't prove it, but I'm just letting you know what other people had said. I'm bringing up the topic or the idea that Dawn was behind the initial rappings and noises because people were calling out the teenage girls for being the ghosts. And a lot of people were saying that it was like a hoax, and it quickly got out of control, kind of like the Salem trials. Someone else who made a really good case for this, well, there was a mentalist that actually was coming through the area in October. George Joseph Kresge Jr., a mentalist, also known as the Amazing Kreskin, showed up to nullify the Smurl's claims. He demonstrated different ways things can shake and go bump in the night without the help of the supernatural. I will add in a clip here where he pretty much tells the reporters and bystanders to think about the most violent thought they can, and a table then leans to one side and a bunch of glasses smashed that were on top of the table. Kresge said that he wanted to demonstrate that things appear to move by themselves without the help of the supernatural, although he wouldn't disclose how he toppled the table or performed the trick.
Then a famous mentalist got into the act. The amazing Kreskin set out to downplay the demons and show the mind is stronger than the ghost.
I want all of you now to think of the most violent thought you can imagine.
Oh!
Now, the only reason I really brought him up was because he said that he had investigated and researched more than 200 stories that were similar to the Smurls. And those incidents almost always involved young teenagers starting it with a hoax or a game for attention. Over sensationalizing. So anyway, as the Smurls began denying access and not speaking to reporters anymore, reporters began to scrutinize and squint over the facts, and some began putting the dots together on issues with the timeline. And as issues with the timeline were being pointed out, other reporters began noticing the stories were becoming more and more elaborate over time. They started off as simple haunting stories, but after the Warrens arrived, things such as the essay from Ghosts started showing up in the stories. Now, if you watched my video on the Snedekers, there was also an essay from Ghosts. This case happened before the Snedekers, though, but you see there's a pattern here when it comes to the Warrens. So the Warrens were actually the ones to release that tidbit to the public. The Smurls didn't do it on their own. And I'm curious if Jack was actually okay with that, or if it was even true. Because according to the Associated Press, here's a story from Ed. Ed said, "I entered the master bedroom and invoked the name of Jesus and commanded the spirit to reveal its identity. Within seconds, the room turned icy cold. There's a foul stench. I would describe it as rotting flesh. Objects on the bureau started to move, and then in front of the bureau, gossamer threads and a mucus-like smoky substance whirled and materialized on the mirror, spelling out filthy obscenities, telling me in no uncertain terms to get out of the house." Now, during story time, I didn't go into graphic detail about Jack's encounter with his succubus, but let's just say he talks in quite detail about a mucus-like substance being left behind on his nether regions. As well, Ed tells this story, like he told this story before, like he told to the family and stuff, and like this came out with the press. So like he said he experienced this when he came to investigate, and they didn't come public to the press yet, so the crazy elaborate stories weren't out yet. So Ed said that he experienced this in the room. I'm curious when the stories of rotting flesh, the smell of rotting flesh came up, because originally it sounded like it was just mold, but suddenly after Ed had this experience, it's rotting flesh that they smelled. And I didn't include all the little details, but they do talk about like things moving on the dresser and stuff like that. And that is something that Ed mentions in his experience in their bedroom. If you guys keep track of my channel, or if you're watching any of the Warren series, if you watched my episode on The Devil Made Me Do It, this really reminds me of the coaching that the Glatzel kids had, where they're kind of being told what a possession by a demon looks like and what a person would do as a possessed person, saying it in front of said person who's experiencing problems so that they would copy it. And I feel like this experience of the story that he said happened in their room, it would give the Smurls the exact information that they would use to describe all of their sensationalized accounts with the succubus and the incubus. I'm not sure, honestly, whether the Smurls were doing this knowingly as a hoax, or whether the Warrens were recognizing pliable minds and filling them with ideas like this. I just happened to notice this, so I wanted to point it out. The press turned sour. The Smurls told newspaper reporter Joseph X. Flannery that when someone visits the house to check on the presence of spirits, nothing happens. They said that experts on the occult explained to them that demons and spirits of the deceased will avoid manifesting themselves when investigators like this are present. And this is very similar to what the Snedekers told reporters. Essentially, reporters were told that a reporter won't be able to experience anything in their house because ghosts don't they hide from reporters and investigators. Hearing now that the Smurls said this, and this was far before the haunting in Connecticut, I think the Warrens told the Smurls this, and the Warrens told the Snedekers this. It feels like we have a copy of information traveling along. So as people started getting a little bit skeptical and as investigators started showing up, this is when they started getting secretive with the press, and they were denying entry where they used to let the press in, and they were avoiding doing interviews and calls and things like that. The The press lashed out. Here's a couple examples. Jill Porter from Philadelphia Daily News said, "As a reporter, I think a certain amount of skepticism is healthy, but I can't understand why the public is so suspicious of the Smurls when so many homes are beset by similar unexplained happenings. Why, just yesterday, my friend Ellen was telling me the demons who have turned her summer house at the seashore into a nightmare. She returned from the beach the other day to discover a paper cup had been stuffed down the toilet, stopping it up and requiring a very expensive visit from the plumber. None of her 3 sons, aged 15, 12, and 9, had any idea how it happened. Of course, though, they were the only ones home this afternoon." So reporters are starting to get snarky. There's another reporter that actually came with an actor, Jason Miller. Jason Miller is the actor from The Exorcist. He played the priest, and there's actually a reason that he was there at the house, which I'll explain in the next section. But the reporter that was with him, Jim Collins, he said, "At the tail end of dull August, nothing churns up a small town grapevine like having a neighbor who works in a bubblegum factory to announce that he had been essayed repeatedly by a crone-like ghost." And apparently, like, a lot of these really snarky responses started coming out around the end of August when they did like a really crummy press conference that the press was just there mocking the Smurls the entire time. Like, the press just showed up to mock them. They weren't even taking them seriously anymore. So it was a mess of a press conference. But the press, they affect the public. So how were the neighbors and the other town members feeling? Neighbors. The Smurls reported that up to 30 people, including neighbors, saw what had been going on inside their home. But only one neighbor came forward saying she heard screams and scratching. And this neighbor's report is in that CSI cop report, so they're not like hiding things that people are saying to corroborate the story. But the report doesn't say like how many times she witnessed this screaming and scratching. Like, was it once? Was it multiple times? And when did it occur? And didn't really talk about the nature of her relationship as well. I just find it weird because it's just one neighbor and all the other neighbors were like, no, there's nothing going on. So I feel like this might be a good friend of theirs, but I don't know. I couldn't find proof of anything. Because in the end, many unhappy neighbors came forward to the press to tell their truth. Many of the residents of the town were very skeptical of the Smurls' motives. Some believed that they had planned the affair from the beginning and that a film or book contract would probably turn up. One neighbor anonymously told the press they are going to try to get a movie made. Another neighbor, who didn't mind being named, Bill Watson, he's quoted as saying, "CNN was here on my porch. There was a camera crew from Germany in my driveway. There were so many people I could hardly get my car out for work." Bernard Radsvin, who we heard about earlier, he actually lived a few doors down. Like I said, this is a small town. He said, "It's a lot of malarkey. There's people been living in this neighborhood for 30 years and didn't have nothing happen. The kids, rather than the demons, are all that's screaming around here." The parish priest for the area, for the family as well, Joseph Adoso, he of course is the priest, he has to be kind and cordial and everything, but what he said is a little bit passive-aggressive. He ended up saying, "We're going to pray for their peace of mind. We can't pray to remove the demons because we don't know for sure that they're even there." And so that anonymous neighbor did tell the press that early on. And in September of that year, 86, the press reported that what a neighbor told them from earlier was true. The Smurls were in negotiations with Star Productions to sell the rights to their story for a future film. Star Productions president Ralph Lima came forward and said, "We have had several discussions. We haven't signed anything yet, but we hope to. It's going to make for one heck of a movie when it's finally made." Janet then was upset by all this. The truth was coming out. So she came out and said, "I don't believe this. Obviously, the press is making things up now. We have no comment." And that's regarding the movie. Philadelphia Inquirer reporter William McAndrew contradicted Janet's claims. He said that he had actually been present for one of the family's meetings with Star Productions. And there's pictures of this, and I said earlier, Jason Miller had gone to meet with the Smurls. He played the priest in The Exorcist. Miller is now living in Scranton, which is nearby this town. So he visited them with his publicist, William McAndrew, shortly after the story broke. The reports were that Miller would direct the film, and it would have a new twist where they would feature this succubus incubus thing. It was going to be like a big part of the movie and be all like shock value. So we've got the Smurls in a couple lies here. And I know people have differing opinions on stuff like this, but to me, when it comes to the paranormal, if you start lying, I can't take anything else that you're saying as proof. And maybe there was like an initial haunting in these cases, like maybe something was there, but the minute you start lying, your credibility just goes out the window. This is a tough enough field as it is to make people believe, but now you've been caught in lies. So, problem. Big problem here. So as soon as this was all reported on, the public found out. They found out about these pending deals. There's a book deal, there's a movie deal, and just it shattered belief for everyone, and everyone was done with them. I just want to add in a little excerpt from the CSI Cop publication. I've been like paraphrasing and rewording like a lot of the stuff, kind of telling it in different voice, but I just found this one kind of interesting. I want to kind of add as an excerpt. Although the Smurls had refused to meet with the CSI Cop investigators, Carr and Gurman surprised them as they were returning from a trip to a grocery store. They were able to engage them in brief conversation. Jack and Janet Smurl insisted that they were telling the truth and that the house is infested by demons and that they're very religious people. Carr asked Jack Smurl if he had discussed a film contract with the Star Group, as the press had been reporting. Jack said, "No, it's totally untrue. We have had over a dozen offers, but we are not interested in any money." Carr persisted, "But did you meet with Loma Miller and McAndrew?" "No," replied Jack, "I did not." And this is the Bill McAndrew that's already confirmed that he was there in that meeting. And that brings us back to what I said earlier. Ralph Loma, president of Star Group, confirmed that they had been negotiating with the Smurls for exclusive rights to the family's tale. So after all this broke, it was pretty obvious that they were making a movie, book, like doing all that. So they kind of went quiet. And then suddenly in October, 4 days before Halloween, the family called the press saying the haunting had miraculously ended. Even though future stories talk about getting them a last exorcism at their new home after they move, according to the UPI story, Janet Smurl said, "It's like a different home now. We are not afraid to go to sleep at night. The elimination of the problem can only be credited to the intercession of the most blessed Virgin Mary, Saint Michael, and the Sacred Heart of Jesus, who had answered our prayers," she said. So she called the press stating this, and there was no exorcism that happened. She said this just happened because the family prayed hard enough. All of this happened within the same year, by the way. That's all very fast. And I find it really interesting how everything's just getting tied up in a bow and rights are being sold and things are being made right in time for like Halloween discussion in newspapers, because they'll get a lot of attention for Halloween, right? But besides the movie, there was a book. The Book Deal. So, on November 14th, same year, St. Martin's Press announced that they've signed a book contract with the Smurls. The book was scheduled to be written by a local newspaper reporter working closely with the Smurls, Robert Curran, who apparently was also a prominent scientific paranormal researcher. But the announcement, the size of the advance to like how much people were getting paid ahead of time was not revealed in the announcement. The book would go on to be called The Haunted, One Family's Nightmare. They ended up releasing a TV movie in 1991, written by Curran, the Warrens, and the Smurls together. Supposedly, the Smurls had to sign off on everything in the movie, and they confirmed that everything in the movie really happened and there wasn't any elaboration by Hollywood. If you want to go watch the movie, you can watch it for free on YouTube. Saying that nothing in that movie has been elaborated for Hollywood, it's a big statement. But the book was criticized by reviewers such as Wilkes-Barre Times leader staff writer Joseph Marasak, probably said that wrong. He ended up saying, and I quote, "Robert Curran forsakes the principles of his trade to give readers a one-sided account of what did or didn't occur over several years in Jack and Janet Smurl's former home." Oh yeah, and I don't know if I mentioned, but the Smurls moved out very shortly after the public lost faith in them. They just moved, they're still like nearby in the area. They just moved like a little bit further away because apparently by then they had enough money to move, and the whole time they were there, they didn't have the money to move. But suddenly when book deals and movie stuff was being signed, suddenly they had money to move. Another reviewer, Mary Beth Gurman, wrote that the book was poorly written. She says, and I quote, "It's hard to conceive of a supposedly sophisticated objective, and, as far as I know, at least until now, credible reporter like Curran taking on the story seriously given the complete lack of any empirical or physical evidence to support it." Pretty much a lot of reviewers and journalists were pretty mad that a journalist wrote this book, and it was like written really one-sided, so they were really disappointed in him, and they kind of flamed him for it. And apparently Paul Kurtz came forward at some point to say that he was told later that the Smurls began talking with Hollywood film companies shortly after their first story broke in the press. And the whole time they were denying that there would be any interest in money. They were denying that there would be a book. They were denying that there would be a movie. So I don't know who told him that. He doesn't back it up with any name or anything like that, but I just thought I'd throw that in there, let you guys know. Now, here I will point out their one daughter, Karen, who is one of the twins. She's pretty public nowadays. She says she is a paranormal investigator, and you can find her on some podcasts, radio shows, etc. She keeps reiterating that her family made $0 off their story. I just don't personally believe this. This can't be true, considering there are witnesses to the Smurls being in contract negotiations, and there's no way that they would spend the time negotiating deals just to turn around and say don't pay us anything. So unless Karen can provide copies of all the contracts with all the publications, I'm just not really buying it that they made $0. And also, like I said, they miraculously had enough money to finally move right after their announcement of like the movie announcement, the book stuff happening, right? And then they told everyone that the demon was miraculously gone. It was really weird timing, and it just kind of seemed to coincide with probably coming into a bit of advance money from a book. She was really young during this time, and I think like 7 or 8. So like her parents could have told her anything, and she just, believes her parents, right? So I don't know. Unless I see like documents that show it that are like, I don't even know like if you could doctor them though. But I'm not buying it. After the Smurl family moved, Deborah Owens moved into the former Smurl home and told reporters that she never encountered anything supernatural while living there. And I looked at like the real estate websites as well. It doesn't say who the current owner is, but it looks like someone else bought it in 1998 and hasn't sold it since. So I don't think that there's any issues with the new owner either, because they've been living there for quite some time now, or at least owning it for quite some time. Now, let's talk about Ed and Lorraine. The Warrens. This is part of the Warrens series, the Warrens Expose series. And there's a few interesting things I want to talk about. And then I want to discuss with you guys something that I have been deducing after making so many of these videos. But to start, in my opinion, in the end, it would seem the Warrens really got the Smurls whipped up into a frenzy. They were urging and encouraging them to go forward. They were like bringing stories forward that, I don't know, like the Smurls are going to back the Warrens, but the Warrens were the ones to report the thing about the succubus. And like, what kind of person wants that public? Like, the Warrens may have just done that without asking the Smurls if it was okay. And they just have to kind of roll with it at that point. And this movie, this made-for-TV movie, The Haunted it was called, this was the first movie that the Warrens made from their cases. Up till now, they were like writing books, making money off books, and they would do these like speaking engagements, and they still did them for all their cases. And I mentioned them in, I think, maybe The Haunting Connecticut, but their speaking engagements were like $1,000 a head, and they would present these cases to people and talk about demons and possessions and hauntings and all that. So they were making money off people, but this was their first movie. There was the Amityville movies, and they were involved in it, but the Amityville story, they only got a small little piece of the pie because too many hands got in there. And I think they started to learn their lesson that they would like secure the area and secure the people and make it all theirs. So Amityville, though, they still made money off Amityville, and they were demonology advisors for all the like sequels and everything too. Amityville is what gave them their namesake. Amityville was a very intriguing story, and they were an intriguing like demon fighting couple, ghost fighting couple, whatever. And so they really sold it, and Amityville helped put them on the spotlight there. I noticed that they learned things from every case. But specifically for the Smurls case, let's talk about the evidence. The tapes. So supposedly Ed kept saying that he had tapes. He had proof. He had video of a dark mass wandering in the Smurl's house. He had audio tapes of the tappings and the bangings and all the noises as well. And he had pictures or something along those lines. But he could never provide the proof. When asked by a CNN reporter where the tapes were, Warren said that he had loaned them to a TV company. When they asked him what the name of the TV company was, he said he didn't remember its name. If you have important proof of the paranormal like that, you would remember who you handed it to. Paul from the CSI Cops appeared with Ed and Lorraine Warren on AM Philadelphia ABC TV. He repeatedly was asking Ed for copies of the tapes. Ed's only response was that they would be released in time, but only to the Roman Catholic Church. The church was reached out to, and no one had seen any of these tapes. So like the Roman Catholic Church, whatever levels, different levels, like don't have these tapes. These don't seem to exist. Okay, if you sent all your proof over to the church, then why is there an hour and a half video on YouTube of the interview with the family and the tour of the house? If all your evidence is with the church, then shouldn't that be with them too? I just feel it's kind of weird. I just think like, well, obviously, there's no evidence, right? Because they also, anytime that they have something, they do release it. Like that fake picture from the Amityville case, the one that it looks like a little kid, but it was one of their investigators that was with them. They released that and made a big deal of that picture. Anytime that they have something that is either faked or accidentally faked, they always release it. And they're like, see, we told you the paranormal's real. But otherwise, they always end up saying like, oh, I have this, but no, you can't see it. You know, he does this all the time. He also did this with the Union Cemetery because it was a faked video that he made with Judith Penny, and he didn't want anyone to scrutinize it because they'd figure out that it was a person on the video. So he kept a copy of it and he just showed it to people once in a while, but he wouldn't let anyone really look at it for very long because it was fake. So this is a classic Ed move right here. This I have evidence, but you're not allowed to see it. You would think over time the church would become frustrated with the Warrens because the Warrens kind of use them as a shield for everything, but the church just kind of stays quiet because they don't want to get involved. They don't want to take a stance on either side. So Ed kind of knew that, and he was kind of taking advantage of the church, to be honest, during all of his cases. Now, something really interesting popped out in this case. I had never heard this in any other case, and when I researched it, I could not find it on any case or any publication at all except for relating to the Smurls. And this was Lorraine's UCLA certification. So apparently, well, the Warrens' popularity was going up, more critics were coming out of the woodwork. So in an effort to prove that she was psychic, Lorraine apparently underwent scientific testing by parapsychologists at UCLA. So there's a team of scientists that supposedly examined Lorraine, and it was led by Dr. Thelma Moss. And after extensive studies, they determined that Lorraine was a light trance medium. Well, Dr. Thelma Moss is a real person. She was actually an actress, and then she ended up leaving acting and teaching at the UCLA. She had a degree in psychology, and then she became a parapsychologist to the stars, apparently. So while she does exist, the story of Lorraine getting certified at UCLA comes into question. People reached out to UCLA to try to confirm this, and they said that no test on Lorraine was ever conducted. So, like, I don't know what's real or not real on that. But during the Smurl thing, like, all the publications were saying that she was UCLA certified psychic, talking as if UCLA certified her and trained her to be a psychic. Like, it was really weird the way it was worded. And I never actually seen this on any other case, so this one kind of surprised me. I thought I would throw it in here for you guys to look at because it's not talked about in any other case, any other publication. I tried to research it more, and I just couldn't really find anything more about it. But the people who did look into it quite a bit, it was actually in an academic publication, and the publication is called The Exorcist Effect, Horror, Religion, and Demonic Belief, and it was written by Joseph P. Laycock and Eric Harrelson, and they're the ones who did the deep dive at UCLA and interviewed people, and they're like, yeah, no, this never happened. So, like, they actually did put in the effort and the work, and it is an actual official publication in an academic organization. All right, now, the last thing I want to talk about with the Warrens, the patterns. It's something that, you know, I'm kind of piecing it together, and I sort of touched on it throughout this whole video, but I didn't want to seem like I was bouncing all over the place, so I was trying to hold it to the end here. But how many videos have we done now? Hold on, let me count how many we're at. All right, we are at 5 videos of the Warrens. So one video was just about the Warrens, and we've done 4 cases so far. Technically 5 cases, because I have been working on a Conjuring thing. I just don't have it ready yet. It's a little bit of a different video, the Conjuring one. But in looking at all these cases, I have seen that there's a pattern. And I'm just going to start calling it the Warren pattern. I think I actually may have nicknamed it the last video, but now I'm sure that there's this pattern. And the pattern reminds me of a grift. I'm seeing the mistakes that they made on past cases and how they adjusted it for future cases. And the more of these cases I do, the more clarity I'm having on this. And there's clearly a grift that was being developed this whole time. Develop, rinse, polish, repeat. Okay, so I made notes of what the pattern looks like, and this would be, I'm even looking at all their future cases too. So I'll go through each step that I've made a note of their pattern, and I'll just discuss a little bit about what they learned from Amityville and how they ended up adjusting so that they didn't make the same mistakes. The pattern. Step 1, come into the house and say it's demons, which only the church can truly fix. So that way they're at the church's mercy. Step 2, start to insulate the family. Between Lorraine's empathy and Ed being very bullish, they were able to really isolate the family from anyone else who's trying to give them help. Step 3, get any other teams, lawyers, psychics, etc. fired. Only the Warrens and their team should be on the case. No one else is allowed to touch this family now. Step 4, indirect manipulation. They're going to coach the family by telling them exactly what the church requires for them to agree for an exorcism. And what ends up happening is the family does it because they're so desperate for this exorcism. Step 5, Ed then provokes the demon. Usually it starts off as really a simple haunting, like it's not that crazy intense when they call in the Warrens, and then Ed comes in and provokes the demon. Now, whether or not these places are really haunted, or whether he's just able to affect them psychologically, it ends up happening. He provokes the demon, and it makes hauntings worse, or it makes families worse off. So then it becomes a more drastic situation, and then the family is under more stress and easier to manipulate. Step 6, then they insist that they go to the public. You have to go to the public, because if you don't go to the public, then they can't make money off the story. So the family goes to the public. Step 7, they raise the shock value of the stories. They try to convince the family of different things that are going on, or whatever it may be, the inner workings, but more shocking stories come out. This whole essay by a ghost, they did this for the Smurl case, and they did this for Haunted in Connecticut case, but I think they eventually learned that people were saying that it was really crazy that they're saying this, so they kind of dropped doing it. They tried it for 2 cases, and honestly, I don't think it really worked out, and that's why they stopped doing it. But they still did raise shock value and saying other things happened. So step 8, then they slide the contract to the family to get the family to sign away their story, their life rights. But they wait until all the stories are in print where they've told the press that they're not going to write a book. So they got to make sure all the newspapers say that first story that they're not going to write a book, and then they slide the contract to the family. The contract, they learned this after Amityville. They lost out on a ton of money on Amityville, so they learned that they need to own the rights to this family story. They need to own the life rights. So any sequels, any movies, any books, they make the money off of it. So they make sure that contract they made ironclad. And between Amityville and this case, because this case, they give the family a little bit too much rights. So going forward after that, they were the ones who owned the family story. What they've done in all their contracts after this is the family gets a fee from the first book, and that's it. They don't control the narrative. They don't control any other books. They don't get any money from movies, things like that. And as part of that contract, they manipulate the family with their fear that this haunting is going on worse or whatever it may be to get them to sign without consulting a lawyer. That's if the family actually thinks they're haunted. If the family's in on it, which I think some of them were, what was it? The Devil Made Me Do It. The Glatzel brother was describing how Lorraine, just really good at manipulating the mom to, end up signing the contract saying, oh, it's just boilerplate. Don't worry. We have your back. We'll make sure you're good. They do that to try to convince the family to sign it without consulting a lawyer. Step 9, they get the church to finally come in, or they bring in their pocket priest to do an exorcism. And step 10, depending, the exorcism works or doesn't work, depending on how much more media attention they need. Step 11, they announce the book deal. Step 12, the family always moves out right after this, but they let the press know that the house has been cleansed. So that's what they didn't do in Amityville. So any future owners that moved in Amityville didn't report a hauntings. And between that and the other stuff that came out, it really got proved as a hoax. So what they did going forward with all the houses is they made sure all the houses were clean and exorcised so that any future owners would say that there's no problem. And then they could turn around and say, well, yeah, because the church exorcised the house. And a special note to all of this, whenever backed into a corner by anyone, Ed blames the church. Either I sent the evidence to the church, or we can't do this because of the church, or the church says this, or whatever. Also, they use being a Catholic to come across as sincere, and they use the fear of God when all else fails. So that is the Warren pattern. And that is what it ended up becoming. It became very like ironclad and like it flowed really well, but they developed this over time. So Amityville, what they learned from that is they had to change the contract around and they had to make sure that the house was exorcised fully. Then the Smurl haunting here, they gave the Smurls a little bit too much say on the movie and things like that. And they kind of like learned from that they wanted full control of the creative rights of that. Oh, something else they learned from the Smurl as well is they got a reporter to do the book, and going forward they then were only hiring like fiction writers, so then they could kind of turn around and be like, well, yeah, it's a fiction writer, he made some stuff up, because in Amityville there's a lot of stuff that was proved to be not true that was in the book. So they kind of learned their lesson with finding the right writer. And every haunting too, they always hire a new writer who's up and coming or not too famous, just right, so that they can manipulate them as well and get them to sign a contract that they can't turn around and go back on because they don't have enough money to sue them. So that's how they do it. Every case is, it all plays out like this. But it's interesting to see how they streamlined it and were able to kind of control the narrative a little bit more and control the family more as time went on. What's interesting to see is, and to think about, is which cases do the families actually think they're haunted and which cases are the families in on the hoax. Because I do think some families actually thought they were haunted. I do think that there might have been like one that was actually a real haunting. But otherwise, though, I think that there's some families that are just in on it. They just wanted to make the money. Tell me what you think about it. And I'm probably talking about this for too long. These are all like this is what I'm seeing. I'm starting to see this in patterns. And I know when I created these videos, I didn't do them in order of when they did their cases. I've just kind of done them in order of what interested me the most. So yeah, we're not doing it in this chronological order, but here we are. All right, that's my rant for now. I'll probably do like a separate video on that at the end of all this. We'll see. Like at the end of my series. Now, last section, I didn't really know where to fit all this in because some stuff I was kind of commenting along the way and some stuff was just a little bit confusing, but I'm going to throw it in here, and if it's something that is important or that you want to look into, here's the information. And I just decided to try to discuss it as viewpoints. Multiple viewpoints. There are many viewpoints on this case, whether it was all a hoax, maybe it was a bit real, but over-sensationalized, and the over-sensationalized part was the hoax, but it was like a slight haunting, or maybe mass hysteria, or a teenage prank. I wasn't really sure if I should go into like detail of every little thing, because there's such little evidence in this case. We end up picking apart a lot more, and then we end up with like a lot more questions and theories, which then starts getting quite messy. There are just a few that I want to cover, however, so let's get into it. The first one I just want to retouch on: renovations. They said that part of the haunting was the pipes leaking, the electrical fires, things of that nature. There were stains on the walls that they couldn't paint over. They were doing their own renovations. They weren't bringing in hired professionals. And I mean, back then at that time, it was pretty common that your dad or granddad or whatever was sort of a jack of all trades, little handyman around the house. But the issue is that this place was bought kind of in a bad condition, and I just think that they just weren't very good at doing the renovations. Yeah, the grandfather was a welder, but he wasn't a plumber welder. Like, welding with plumbing is cold welding, and it's a different technique. So who knows how good he really was at it. And he's also apparently he was able to do some electrical, but he didn't have certifications as a plumber or electrician. He was only certified as a welder. So I think a lot of that stuff is really just shoddy craftsmanship. Plus, who knows, maybe they could have been buying cheap materials as well. When it comes to paint, I used to actually work as a painter for a little bit. And if there's a stain on the wall, there's a specific kind of paint that you need to use to cover said stain. Because the way they described it, it sounded like it was like a fire stain, like a smoke stain, probably an electrical fire stain. And you have to buy special paint for that. This is before the internet, and it's a small town, so no one is advising them properly on the paint. They just gave up and put paneling up instead, which is fine, but really they just had the wrong paint. The carpet that they got, that's a weird story. It sounds like the carpet came already stained, or they were confused about the design that they chose. They should have just sent it back to the store. I don't know why they kept it. So that covers off the renovations. The second thing I want to talk about is the church. This story gets a little confusing because there's a lot of reverends and priests and bishops and fathers, and there's all sorts of names in the story. I honestly could not properly organize where they fit in, at what point, what were they really helping with, and what timeline did they fit in. So I already gave you a bunch of names throughout all of this video, but here's some more that were found here that I didn't really touch on yet. So I'll throw the names at you. And hey, if you have any more context on this, go ahead, leave it in the comments for sure. So first we have Reverend Gerald Mullally, Chancellor of the Diocese of Scranton. He enlisted the help of Reverend Alphonsus Trebold, a theology professor at New York St. Bonaventure University. But this Reverend Alphonsus didn't make the trip to visit the family. So I don't know why they talk about this in the book, or I don't really know the point. As well, Ed did talk about other priests visiting the home for like blessings, like a prayer group, but he didn't really give names, so I'm not sure. Also, there was a priest who stayed a couple of days to try to gather evidence to give to the church, and when he stayed with the family for a few days, nothing happened, so he couldn't report anything back to the church. Next name, Reverend Neil J. Van Loon, secretary to Bishop James C. Timlin, offered various speculations but refrained from making public comments or definitive answers. These people were contacted by the press, essentially. In the end, the Scranton Catholic Diocese did investigate the house as well, and Father Trebold was their representative. For a time, he stated that he worked with the Warrens until he discovered, and I quote, "They weren't sincere, were not what they purported to be, and were given to sensationalizing." And then he went on to explain that he would go to their lectures, and when they saw him, they toned down their act. So he started wearing disguises to go to their future talks. So like he ended up kind of being a little bit of a stalker with them later, and went to their talks to kind of, I guess, keep an eye on them. And maybe that's why like the church wasn't really taking them seriously, because he's reporting back like the over sensationalizing that they were doing. So he's an interesting character in the entire Warren's timeline of events. However, Trebold sides with the family, the Smurl family, and believes that something occurred in the house, but he can't say if it was demonic. And the last point I want to talk about is kind of interesting as well. I'm going to point out here that they did live near a river, and there was a hurricane, you know, that before they moved in there and everything. So there could have been like smells and things in the air and issues because they were near the water and the hurricane and everything. But this little side tangent, it's very interesting. So let's get into it. If this place was actually haunted, let's say it's just the grounds or something, because apparently in 1778, the area that they're in is a battleground, and it's referred to as Witch's Rock or Bloody Rock. It's just down the street from where they are. The story goes that an Aboriginal mother's son was killed by a white man, and they said that she took revenge on all of them. She put a curse on generations, and she like unalived like a lot of them. Like she like went ham. Okay, I just want to bring this up to show you guys. So their home was here, right? And this rock and this like battlefield was like right here. It's literally like 2 minutes down the street. Oh, and you can see this is the river I told you about right here. You know, I am a skeptical believer. So what if this place was haunted? What if them doing the renovations kind of stirred up the spirits? But what if it's not the spirits that the fake psychics were saying it was? But what if it's actually related to this battleground and what happened with this Aboriginal mother losing her sons? This at least has a background story, because there were psychics that came in approved by the Warrens, and they said a story something like, oh, this guy unalived his wife. They gave a name and everything, like they had details, but research was done. These people don't exist, but this story does exist, and this is actually like confirmed. So this I think might be interesting. So this is Queen Esther's Rock, aka the Bloody Rock. Okay, I'm gonna blur out parts of this because I don't know how mad YouTube will be. It says this monument was erected in 1962 and commemorates the estimated 14 American soldiers who were captured and unalived by an Aboriginal woman that occurred within the backdrop of the American Revolution. It's known by some as the Battle of Wyoming and others as the Wyoming Valley. I won't say that word just in case. Oral histories claimed the victims were captured by Iroquois warriors and taken to a woman identified as Queen Esther, who sought to avenge the death of her son. If anything was haunting the land there, I would think it's this. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of pain in this story too. So this, I think, sounds more intriguing as a possible reason for the land to be haunted. So with all this evidence, or really just conjecture and logical analysis, I guess, it becomes clear that the truth behind the Smurl family haunting, it's not really like clear cut. The evidence is murky. I mean, there's a lack of evidence. The lines between fact and fiction are blurred. But a couple things I do think are for certain. One, the Warrens definitely made this over sensationalized and faked a lot of stuff and probably led to the Smurls lying. And two, the Smurls were caught in some lies. So their story, it struggles to stand up against the skeptics. There were some possible explanations for things as well. But this is one of the few cases of the Warrens where a priest actually comes forward and says, oh, I think there was something there, just not as crazy as what the Warrens make it out to be. This may have just been a simple haunting, but religion and belief turned it into something more than it was. Who knows? But regardless, there really isn't any evidence to back the Smurls. I still don't have trust in the Smurls, because once you get caught in a lie with this stuff, I don't know, it really breaks your credibility. But tell me, what do you think? Leave a comment below and give your thoughts on where you land on the Smurl case. Do you have any other info that is missing that I was having trouble finding? Because it was a bit of a pain, this case, to find some info on. So, and also, if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. And, you know, I'm trying to grow this channel out because I have some plans for things that I would love to do, but I need more hands to help me. I'm going to end this off and I will link the Warrens playlist for you. Thank you for joining me in this week's video, and I will talk to you all later.